Welcome. Can you hear me okay? Well, thank you very much for being here. I'm Gibbs Knotts, Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences here at the College of Charleston, and I'm also a political science professor, so that's why I'm particularly excited about our event tonight, Picturing Democracy, the Future of Photojournalism. As a longtime student of politics, I am keenly aware of the critical role a free and objective media can play in a democratic society. I'm extremely honored to partner with South Carolina Humanities on this project, and I'd like to take a moment to invite you to our next and final event in the series on memes. The event's going to take place November 10th over at Rita Auditorium, and it's going to feature the moderator, who's the Holy City Sinner himself, Christian Singer, who's the man behind Charleston's most popular blog. And the panelists will also include College of Charleston's own Ryan Milner, who's chair of the Department of Communication and the author of the very excellent book, The World Made Meme. The panel will also include Emery Parker, another College of Charleston graduate, who's now the data project manager at STAT. And Emery was part of a team that won the Pulitzer Prize for public service for a series on South Carolina's epidemic of criminal domestic violence when he was working for the Post and Courier. So it's now my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Tara Mortensen. Dr. Mortensen holds a BA in Mass Communication from Black Hills State University and an MS in Journalism from South Dakota State University and a PhD in Journalism from the University of Oklahoma. She studies visual communication, media sociology, de-professionalization of visual journalism, amateur photography, and user-generated content. Dr. Mortensen currently serves as Associate Professor in the School of Journalism and Mass Communications at the University of South Carolina, just right up the road in Columbia. Her recent publications include From Confrontations to Civil Liberties, Newspaper Photo Framing of Police Brutality and Riots in Los Angeles in 1992 and Ferguson, and Does Photojournalism Matter? A content analysis of photojournalism in the Times Herald Record before and after layoffs of the photojournalism staff. So I'm going to now turn things over to Dr. Mortensen to introduce our esteemed panel.
Panelists, please come out. Great. Thank you for coming, everybody. We've got a wonderful group of panelists for you this evening. I'd first like to introduce Mr. Cecil Williams in the middle here. He is a South Carolina native and photographer since the age of 9. He's also a photojournalist, a visual historian, and of the civil rights era, among many other significant moments. He is the author of 5 civil rights era publications. Thank you. And he's more recently the founder of the Cecil Williams South Carolina Civil Rights Museum, which is currently the first and only civil rights museum in the Palmetto State. So welcome. Thank you for being here. Sean Rayford to the left over here. He is a freelance photojournalist currently living in Columbia, South Carolina. He works with Getty Images, the Associated Press, the New York Times, and a number of other outlets. And he graduated in 2001 from the University of South Carolina. And finally, Dr. Kyser Lough, here at the right side, is an assistant professor of journalism at the University of Georgia in Athens. And he is a longtime and current freelance photographer. He is a researcher, and his research explores questions of power, access, and boundaries. He studies how news images are made, selected, and interpreted, as well as the photographers themselves and how they define and operate within their field as they fight for legitimacy and job security. Welcome, Dr. Lough. Thank you. And again, my name's Tara Mortensen. I'm at the University of South Carolina. I am the only non-photographer here, but I'm also one of the greatest appreciators of photojournalism and a great consumer of the visual form of communication, and do a lot of research about what is happening to news photography in the last 20 years with the layoffs of many staff photojournalists, what that means, what that looks like, and how people interpret that. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with a broad question for our panelist, and that's, why does photojournalism matter? That's a big one. Why does photojournalism matter? Dr. Williams, excuse me, Mr. Williams, would you like to begin? Why does photojournalism matter? Matter. I'm not used to being with mics. I'm sorry, I'm probably not close enough.
Well, I think without photojournalism, this would certainly be a dull world. I believe that the entire experience living in such an environment that we do live in today, we need experienced journalists to capture things from a professional perspective and viewpoint, and to, again, come up with images that, I guess, answer that who, why, where, when, what that we are looking for. Certainly when photojournalism appears in print, it's important to be as concise as possible. But with the immediate journalism and social media we have today, it certainly has changed. And I think that as we go forward, since our topic is the future of photojournalism, it's going to be changing more rapidly. When I covered an event in Colombia, the bringing down of the Confederate flag, I wasn't able to get a close-up view because there were so many people surrounding the area where that was happening, and I did not have my telephoto lens. And I realized there that indeed I had come through a period where, you know, this is indeed a different day. There were over 5,000 people, I think, just in the immediate area where the flag was being brought down. And then an event here in Charleston, South Carolina, also was very difficult for me to cover. And in fact, I chose not to cover it at all because of the, I think there were really too many journalists and too many people here covering it. And that is when the Emmanuel 9 incident occurred, that tragic. So those are some of my reasons why I believe that photojournalism is important today. It will be important as well in the future.
Thank you. Dr. Lough and Mr. Rayford, is there anything you want to contribute?
Yeah, I think, you know, the joy of photojournalism is that it allows us to witness and tell the stories of humanity, and to do that in a snapshot. I get asked a lot, like, why do we still have photojournalism when we have video? Why can't we tell the story in moving pictures? And you can tell so much in a single snapshot that when you look at that photo, you have that immediate emotional reaction, the subconscious reaction, and then you can glean so much out of that picture without having to be taken through the process of a video. Your eyes can travel across it and get all that information and in one frozen moment. And that's part of what makes, to me, photojournalism so powerful, because it's the photojournalist's decision of when to take that frame, when to push the shutter button and freeze that moment in time forever, versus having to, you know, go through a whole video process.
Very good.
And I'll just add, I guess, our role as journalists in general, in addition to providing the news content for the people that are alive right now, we have a role of contributing to a first draft of history for future generations to consume. And as we go through these historic times right now that's been really, I guess, made evident to me of that role as just opposed to the people that are going to read and see and consume your work today and tomorrow.
Very good. Thank you so much. So a big question we want to get at tonight is, what are the challenges that the profession or occupation of photojournalism are facing, or is facing currently in about the last 20 years or so, given the democratization of photography? Everybody has a camera pretty much on them at all times. So in addition to that and adding to that, what are some of the challenges that we're facing right now as photojournalists?
I find sometimes access becomes a problem in trying to do something. Even though I wear many hats today, I still feel that basically I'm a photographer and photojournalist, and the digital domain and the digital world that we live in today certainly has changed, but still yet there are advantages and disadvantages of being a professional photojournalist. Some of the disadvantages would be that sometimes you're not able to, as I was back in the days of the civil rights movement, there were times when there were meetings that would be closed to the press. But since I was an eyewitness and a participant and a photojournalist, I was able to cover those events. But access is so important. When President-elect, it was when Obama was running for the president, I would say it like that. He appeared in Orangeburg, and for a while I wasn't able to get the access that I wanted to, even though he was at my alma mater, Claflin University. And when I was given access, because the security was understandably very tight, I appreciated it, but sometimes, again, there are disadvantages. I noticed one thing about the fact that now almost everyone has a cell phone, and even in this era when I guess the public has become somewhat of the role of a photojournalist, we haven't seen as many Bigfoot sightings, and there haven't been as many abductions, alien abductions. I guess it comes along with the territory that maybe some of that was a myth and make-believe anyway. But it certainly is getting very interesting that those are two things I've been waiting to see. When is there going to be another abduction? Or when is there going to be another photograph appearing of Bigfoot? And I haven't seen that lately.
Any other?
On challenges, that's
yeah.
what we're talking about?
Yes.
It's a challenge to find work. I'm a freelancer, so I'm constantly trying to figure out ideas that I can pitch. The national media seems to still have budgets, but local newspapers' budgets for photographers is really, really dried up, and I don't really work with local newspapers in the state of South Carolina anymore, and I used to work with numerous, and that's just not there. Oftentimes, reporters will just have their cell phones and make a photo with that, and they can kind of get away with that for some things. Sports, they still need to hire a photojournalist because there's a lot more specialized equipment for that. But it got old shooting only sports when you were more interested in, working on the news part and society and things that were more important than balls and teams.
So photojournalists can't work from home. You can't phone in a photograph like you can phone in an interview. And especially over the last 2 years, that's made the already kind of precarious role of a photojournalist even more precarious, because you have a global pandemic where, as a reporter, you can call and try and get a quote from a doctor, you can get the stats from the hospital, but if you want to show what's happening in the world, you have to physically go out there, which puts a lot of photojournalists into harm's way, because you're, especially in the early months of the pandemic, you're not really sure how to protect yourself. And same thing during protests and rallies, when we talk about trust in the media and violence against the media. If a reporter needs to stay safe, they can watch the live stream of the rally and cover it, and they're fine. You look at events and you see photojournalists assaulted. You see cameras on tripods pushed over and smashed. You see them being yelled at. And they can't just walk away from that. They have to be covering it. And so you take the health concerns and the safety concerns of having to physically be there, and then you look at the rapid kind of closure and layoffs of staff photojournalists and this move toward freelance, which in one way, I don't know what the benefit, there are some benefits, but, and Sean, you can speak to this more than myself, if you're not on a staff, you might not have good health insurance. You might not have good equipment. You might not have access to the people that you need to help keep you safe when you're out in the field. If you get injured, the protection that you might need for health insurance, for safety gear, and even the staff photojournalists. Lola Gomez, who was at the Austin American-Statesman, did everything she could to protect herself, had a great video wiping down her cameras and showing all the ways she was keeping herself safe, and she was hospitalized for COVID, one of the early cases among the journalism community, which was such a huge kind of freak-out moment for a lot of folks, especially the freelancers who are out there that might not have that kind of protection. And so I see that moving forward as we move into whatever comes next, we still have to have photojournalists there. We're not yet to the point where we can just send in a drone or send in a robot with the camera. We need the bodies of photographers there with their cameras to witness these events and have that lived experience that they can then show the world through their camera. And so, yeah.
Very good. So I'm going to ask a follow-up question. So when I ask about the challenges that photojournalism is experiencing right now, most of our panelists talked about, from the photojournalistic perspective, access, and those types of things. What are the implications of the changing photojournalistic landscape for news consumers, for visual news consumers? So if we are no longer looking at news images that are exclusively taken by trained, professional, news, abiding by ethics photojournalists on a staff, but we're looking at file photos and stock photos and citizen photos and all kinds of photos taken by what some researchers call word journalists or just ordinary non-photography journalists. What are the implications of that for consumers in terms of the news that they consume, the visual news that they consume? Do you all have any comments on that?
I'll touch on, I guess, the scenario involved in the use of captions that photojournalists typically ascribe to, including really basic, simple information. And this also ties into the people that are putting out the photos in the design team of the newsroom, whatever that is, whether it's a TV news station or a newspaper. A lot of times that gets overlooked. They don't include dates and places. As an example, there was some really bad flooding several months ago in Tennessee, and one of my photos that I made from the flooding in 2015 was used in a TV news story, and there was no caption. It was a TV news web piece, And it was used to, tell the story of flooding in Tennessee in 2021. And I think with the people in the photojournalism community that are not working at these places to talk to their colleagues about how important these things are, we'll see more of this stuff. And you can imagine, the different stories you can tell if you don't include the date and the location.
So Sean, do you think audiences notice and care about these things?
I don't think they really pay much attention, to be honest. If it's brought up to them and they're like, if that makes sense, if they're aware of it and they say, oh wow, this is not the time and place that this story is about, they feel betrayed. So they care about it, but they won't necessarily know that they care about it.
Thank you.
I mean, a lot of it comes down to how this photo was created. One of the double-edged swords of journalism is that we're not licensed or certified to be journalists. We have the First Amendment. So anyone can be a journalist, which is great, but also anyone can be a journalist. And so journalists sort of set the rules for what it means to be a good journalist. And we have codes of ethics that we're supposed to abide by to make sure that we seek truth and report it and minimize harm and be accountable and transparent and act independently. I just tested my students on that yesterday, so I had to make sure I memorized those two. But journalists have to follow those codes when they're making their photos and making their stories and reports. And it might seem inconsequential that we might have a contributed photo from an event that was not taken by a photojournalist, but if that person maybe took a picture only of somebody they knew that was at the event or only put it in a flattering light, then we're starting to tell a different story than somebody who is trying to act as an independent observer of that event. And so you run into some of those ethical questions of, are we now telling this true story, or as true as we can and as independent as we can, or is the person that we're getting football photos from each week just sending us pictures of their kid who's out on the football field making all these plays? And so when you don't have, one of the things I love about journalism is that we don't have a board that can take away our license to be a journalist. But since we don't have that, we have to make sure that we're staying above board so that if the audience does notice, which I agree, I think a lot of times it's something that only we kind of see and talk about. But if they do notice that we can help show that we are doing things above board and hopefully help rebuild some of that media trust, especially when we're being bombarded even more so now with misrepresented images and fake images and whatever the future holds for all of that.
I think sometimes, very definitely you have to have integrity and also some standards that you go by in this world we live in today, and with the computer being what it is, and also with Photoshop. Actually, I think since I've used Photoshop, probably since Photoshop was Photoshop, there's probably nothing I probably could not do or create or tweak to maybe tell another, but the integrity, I think, among photojournalists, I think we have to hold ourselves with high standards not to do that. If nowadays we can set our cameras so that if we're going to take something that's moving fast, we can set the shutter so that it rapidly takes pictures almost approaching being video, so many frames per second, and then choose the best angles. But I think that's okay. But if we, again, go back to our computer and then tweak it, then I think something is lost.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Of course.
So Cecil, I'm glad you brought that up because I've started to see photographers who are filming their events in 4K video, and so they're capturing video, and then that video quality is so high that afterwards they can go through that video and grab a still that is sharp enough and quality enough that it can run as a single photo, which is what you're saying. We're going straight from kind of burst mode and then choosing a photo to almost just film the event and then pick your stills afterward. What do y'all think about that? Is that where we're going? Where does that fall under, I guess, the ethics of photojournalism?
I think that would be perfectly great, because if the end results will be shared to the readership or the viewers, and we can get something that really tells the story, the who, the why, the what, the where, and the when, you know, it would be, that's the results we're looking for. I am a subscriber to Time magazine, and during my youth, the magazine that I looked up to and I tried to take pictures like what appeared in this magazine was Life magazine. You know, that was an era that's long gone, but it had the highest standards of photojournalism and the greatest photographers taking pictures for them. And I happened to meet a few of them, including Alfred Eisenstadt. Alfred Eisenstadt, in a way, was a little different type of photographer, somewhat like I saw you coming here this evening with a camera, just a very simple camera, no flash, no bag of equipment, no nothing, but just a tiny camera that he was able to remain almost anonymous in taking his photographs and therefore getting more realistic photographs. And those are, you know, that would be an example of where, again, you have journalists out there trying to get and live up to their profession in really capturing images that really depict whatever it is that we are covering as photojournalists.
When you're making more frames, on the back end, when you go to edit, it takes enormously much more time. So there's going to be some constraints, I think, about like using that technology and balancing it with like how much work a photojournalist or a photographer can do on the back end when they're going through and choosing their frames. You know, if you're at an all-day event or, you know, a long day of coverage, you can't go back and pick out frames if you're shooting, you know, 20 frames a second all day long. You've just got too much material to go through. So I guess that's my thoughts on that.
Thank you for the great follow-up question, Dr. Lough. All right, so we have all these people with cameras, and they're pretty good cameras on your phone. They're very good. They do rapid fire. They have high resolution. People are taking photographs right at the moment when news happens. And quite honestly, ordinary citizens are taking some pretty valuable news imagery. With all that, with the technical flawlessness, with the timeliness, and just the availability of technology, what is it that photojournalists bring today that anybody else with a camera cannot and does not, in your mind?
I'll just say time and effort, maybe. You know, when I'm out on an assignment and I'm being paid, I can focus my time and effort on doing that job. Whereas I think that, you know, your typical person on the street isn't going to be as dedicated to that task. And so you're just, I guess, less likely to miss something.
Thank you.
There have been moments in my life when I'm taking photographs of something where I wish that I had gotten a different angle, or I wish I had a different perspective. And as I look at those moments, I believe that in today's world, when we as professional photojournalists, with the new equipment that we have, let's say compared to what is available to, say, someone using a cell phone, for that matter, someone using a camera that they bought, you know, maybe under $1,000. Most of the time, photojournalists, I'm sure you gentlemen do, have, you know, the best of equipment. We have cameras today. For example, recently I bought the Fuji FGX, which has 100 megapixel, so, you know, in each image, I can have almost infinite resolution quality to draw upon to make a better picture. And so if indeed we are getting paid as photojournalists to be the best in our field, we will, I think, continue to really offer these kinds of advantages over just ordinary camera shooters. And of course, sometimes, you know, they do catch that, you might say, fraction of a second moment that no one else is around, and a spontaneous event, something that happens spontaneously that no one else captures. And of course, I'm sure that the news media, will welcome that image if it does capture something, especially if it's newsworthy.
I think it's all the storytelling. And that's not to say that people who don't consider themselves photojournalists can't tell stories, because you can. Well, first of all, if you have a camera, you're a photographer. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You might not be a great photographer or a good photographer, but you're a photographer. That's something that just gets under my skin. But as photojournalists, one thing we try and do is focus on the story and use the journalism training of how to tell a good story, period, no matter what medium you're telling it through. But it has to start with a good story. And so our classes are focused on that. It's not just, you know, show us what this looks like, but show us what this means, and tell those deeper stories and show the deeper stories of humanity through your pictures and through those moments. And so not just the ethical way of doing it, but also how to talk to people, and how to look for the good light, and look for the interesting people and the interesting stories that are happening, and use that journalistic storytelling training to capture that and bring that forward, so that we can tell the story of what it means to be human right now, or what it means to be part of a community, or, yeah.
I'll add too that other folks outside can come and verify the actual photos. So like someone, you know, there'll be a credit, you know, with my name. Someone can look that up, look at my body of work, and say, okay, this guy's legit. He, you know, his objective. Oftentimes people reach out to me, ask me questions about an event, and, you know, I'm there for it. Where if you're just sourcing, you know, public photos that aren't credited oftentimes, and you can't look back at, you know, what else has this person do? What is their stance? Are they objective? And are they available to, you know, talk to someone about what happened that day?
Great comments. Thank you so much. So we have a lot of challenges facing photojournalists right now. I think all of us up here on the stage know that these challenges are important, and we want to see these challenges overcome. We very much value the profession of photojournalism and how it differs from photography taken by anybody who happens to be on the scene of news with a decent decent camera, which most cameras on our iPhones are pretty darn good right now. They'll take a nice clear image, and if you're lucky, you'll get like a really good shot. So we have all these challenges, and we're kind of talking about the things that we think photojournalists contribute that ordinary people on the scene cannot, or things like stock photos and file photos cannot replace. So I guess my follow-up question is, can we, and what can we do, if so, do to overcome these challenges? So, and just as a follow-up, I think that photojournalism is so incredibly important, especially today, because we are not a generation of readers, right? We are a generation of viewers. You can look at Instagram and TikTok and Facebook. Most people, research would show, they get a lot of their news just by looking at photos and headlines. A ton of what we know about the world is just by looking at pictures. So I think that photojournalism is incredibly important. I think that we've all made the case that it's incredibly important. So can we overcome these challenges? Can we, as photojournalists, not be the first on the chopping block when news organizations are trying to save money and cut staff? How's that for a super long question?
I think providing the deeper story and the context is so key to selling how photos are windows and not window dressings, and how they are actually giving us more than just a pretty snapshot. Because so many times the photo is the afterthought. It's we have the story, we have the page, oh, we need a photo. And that's when the photo assignment goes out, when it's way too late. And to move photography from the afterthought to the forefront, especially, as you said, in an era where so much of the internet is visual media, you know, we just, our advanced photojournalism professor at the university just took all of our advanced students to the Georgia National Fair for the weekend for a weekend workshop to do essentially snapshot street photography. And what made these photos so much more powerful was what I said before, which is what he tells the students every time we go out to the fair, is show us what the fair means, not what the fair looks like. And so what the students do is, yes, they get a cute photo of a kid, you know, throwing a dart, you know, at one of the carnival games, but then they go up and they talk to the parents, and they talk to the kid, and they find out that this is the kid's first time at the carnival. You know, they don't just get a picture of a woman starting to put makeup on as she's getting ready to compete in a horse riding event. They go up and talk to her, and they find out that she's doing this to honor a friend of hers who died last year, who was really big into the horse circuit. And then she follows her throughout the day and finds out she wins her event. And so now we don't just have a snapshot photo, we have that deeper story underneath it, which shows the value beyond just it being a really pretty picture. And kind of to what Sean was saying, it shows your worth as a journalist. Now you have a story. Now a reporter can follow up with this, and so you're adding value to the newsroom, and adding value as just somebody who can do more than, who can go out and find stories and not just come back with the pictures.
Also, I believe as journalists, we can afford to be more immersive in stories and in storytelling. We can stay focused on an event wherein perhaps an amateur or just a person with a camera, and I agree that we all are photographers today, but still yet, as you cover your tornadoes and hurricanes, you can stay focused on that event. When I was 13 or 14 years old, I remember coming to Charleston, South Carolina, where I was to photograph this, in the mind of a 13-year-old, this big lawyer. The big lawyer turned out to be Thurgood Marshall. And during those days, I had really my second camera. And it was my first camera that had a flash unit. And as opposed to like now, wherein I go to events, and I even do occasionally a wedding. And at a wedding, I might come back with 3,000 pictures. And surely I'm not going to give the family of the bride 3,000 pictures, but I will cull them down. But when I took that picture of Thurgood Marshall, going back to that, I took one picture of him getting off the train, because during those days we had to use, when we used a flash, the bulb that was one shot and that's it, went off, that was it. And so I captured that image in one shot, but opposed to today where we have cameras that, number one, can often do the job even without a flash and natural light. But also, I think another thing that we as professional photojournalists learn is that each one of us probably have developed a style. And oftentimes to such a great extent that we can be recognized by our style and the perspective that we bring to coverage of an event. Certainly, I remember that the photographer that I mentioned earlier, Alfred Eisenstadt, he had achieved making 50 covers for Life magazine, which more than any one other photographer. And then another photographer I got to know very well was Manita Sleet, who worked for Ebony magazine. And I worked for the sister publication, Jet magazine, which was their smaller news magazine, where Ebony was a photo feature magazine. And Manita Sleet had a style because even during those days, now he carried a lot of equipment. I mean, when he went on an assignment, he took, I mean, it would take him like 3 trips back to his car to get his equipment to come in and set up the lighting. But he had very distinctive lighting, and I learned a lot from just looking at the work, and soon began even to be able to notice his work from other photographers. So I think that's another thing we as professionals can bring to the table.
I just reinforce what we were hearing over there. You have to work harder, I think, in trying to tell a story and bringing those stories out, and being a more skillful journalist as opposed to just making the photos. You said it best, so.
Can I follow up with you on this question? Because one of our PhD graduates, Dr. Andrea Briscoe, wrote her dissertation on kind of the precarity of the freelance photojournalists, and particularly the women in photojournalism, but also looking at just the differences between being out there as a freelancer versus coming in as a staff photojournalist in terms of resources and the amount of time dedicated to trying to find work versus being able to work. And can you talk a little bit about that and like what needs to happen in the world of freelance?
In terms of I can speak, I spend a lot of time trying to pay attention to what's going on in my area and trying to find what I can turn into an assignment. I subscribe to a lot of newspapers, and I consume a lot of news, and just try to stay aware. And I feel like my mind is always churning to try to find the stories and the things that I can shoot, but I'm not connected to any newsroom, which I used to be when I was freelancing with the local papers. At least, I was conversing with the reporters, but now that's not even happening. So I don't know.
So one of the advantages when you have that newsroom relationship is that you build a relationship with your community too. And so you walk in somewhere and people recognize you and they know you, and it's like, oh, here's Sean coming to make our picture. And that helps with access, like Cecil was talking about, and being able to tell those deeper stories. As a freelancer, are you finding that more challenging?
I've lived in Columbia since '97. I worked at the USC newspaper. I bartended too for over a decade at a music club, so a lot of people in town know me and know what I do now. I remember in 2015, when we had the floods, I'd show up in someone's neighborhood, and I remember someone specifically posting, "Oh no, if Sean's in your neighborhood today, that's not good." And I was running into like football coaches. I ran into someone who I photographed their wedding. They were volunteers out cleaning out someone's house. But I had freelanced at the state newspaper for, many years, and I'd worked with the Free Times and worked with the Gamecock and done lots of things that connected me to the community. But, maybe those bottom rungs of the ladder aren't there as much as they used to be in that sense. And I think that's a very good way to look at the way that journalism, photojournalism is now, is with the local newspapers and their struggles, those bottom rungs. Like, I wouldn't be where I am now if I didn't have all that time that I freelanced and interned at the state newspaper and didn't have all those opportunities to practice my craft and to make mistakes and get to where I am today. So I think it's a much tougher climb without those opportunities, with local newspapers.
I think as professional photojournalists, we take images that are very, very powerful, and they can form opinion. And that can also be misused, however. For example, often I've taken pictures, and sometimes maybe one of my images, one of the images I might have taken might have captured that person with their eyes half open or closed, and and if there was a meanness, among my intent, of course, you could submit that, as one of the pictures. But there's something inside that, that keeps you from doing things like this. But the images we take are supposed to reflect the moment. But you could maybe take a person walking who's in the news, for example, and it could be that it's an unusual angle, and you can get a low angle, a medium angle, or a high angle. For example, depending on what type of photography you're doing, you can really make a thin person look larger, or you can make a person who has more weight look smaller from the angles and the perspective. So there's a lot of power in that. And there's a book that I admire by a Alabama photographer who captured the Reverend Martin Luther King, and the name of it is, I think, Powerful Images, I believe is the name of it. And that I think that I began to respect my own profession because of the power that is involved, or the potential power that is involved in image taking. One thing since we have been talking about the future of photography, of photojournalism, one thing I'd like to add is that since I started in film, you can imagine how many film I have in my possession since I started in photography at 9 years old. And thanks goodness, with the era of digital, now we, of course, everything is on the computer now. But it brings in another problem that or a challenge, I would say, that we have in the future, and that is the storage, because as our technology has changed, for example, I remember back when we had the floppy disk, and then we had another type of thing, and then nowadays we have the flash drive, the SD card. So it is going to be quite challenging to find a way that we would be able to transition from the images that we are creating today to have them for tomorrow, because there will have to be some type of consistent, I think, standards on how those images are transferred. Will it be a hard drive? And if that I have purchased at least 10 hard drives over the last, say, 6 years, and maybe 3 of them have failed. And sometimes you can't rescue your images from those failed files. So I think that's going to be a great challenge for us as professional photojournalists.
So that's kind of a technical concern in terms of the digitization of photography and the preserving of history, whereas it used to be, well, there were challenges with that as well, with film degrading and such, but certainly digital formats are a little bit more, they are newer, and we are having to transfer from format to format, so those are concerns as well. Great. Trying to think of how to phrase this, so I guess I'll start here. So what would you say to an up-and-coming or aspiring photojournalist who sees the impact of photography on informing citizens and recording history and all of the most wonderful things that photojournalism does? Somebody who wants to pursue this career, what would you say to them? And that can be in terms of advice or just directions that you would go in.
Very frequently, a parent will send me a budding son or daughter who wants to get into photography or photojournalism. And the story that I tell them is exactly that. I tell them to, with today's technology and the capabilities of the equipment we have available today, you need to do one thing: learn how to tell a story. So with all of the social media outlets we have and those things, the platforms we have today to speak to the world and tell these stories, the thing that's going to have to really be fulfilled, and right now there's not enough of it, is the content. What's going to fill the content of those hours that people will be spending in front of a screen, whether it's a cell phone, or whether it's a laptop, or whether it's a 100-inch Sony Bravia, which costs $7,000. You need powerful and storytelling, I think, content to really, that's going to be, in fact, we have a shortage of that even today, enough content. I imagine that's why some television stations, after a while, they go into a repeat. They don't have enough good content for the continuity of their programming to occur. But I try to encourage youth who come to me, boys and girls, that that's what they must learn how to do. How do you best tell a story? What is the best way to approach it? Do some research, and that it's also going to be more competitive out there, because this generation is growing up in a time when at 4 years old, we have the youth of the day taking images as soon as they can get a phone. And imagine how good the technology is going to be in a cell phone 5 years from now. Is it going to approach my $7,000 100 megapixel camera? It could be, and they would be able to do it in a tiny fraction of that. But again, my encouragement would be to tell our youth today that to be great storytellers at the very basic level.
Two things. First, equipment is important, but it's not important. It matters, right? But you start with where you are. Just like photojournalists can't work from home, photojournalists can't do their job without a camera. I mean, that's, if you take my photojournalism class, you have to have a camera, and that's a several $100 minimum commitment that not everyone can just drop money on a camera. And I know that gear oftentimes is used as kind of a boundary device as to how good of a photojournalist or photographer you are, how good you are perceived. But start with where you're at, start with what you have. Don't let gear, fear that you don't have the right thing, keep you from doing it until you can work your way up. I photographed weddings until I could buy the lenses I wanted, and then I stopped photographing weddings. But that's where the money was to get the lenses. And so there's so many reasons that you can come up with to not want to pursue it, and the gear is such an easy one. The other thing that I constantly work through with my students is there are a lot of photographers out there, and especially in the digital age, like we've been talking about, the competition is much more severe than it used to be. And you can go out to cover something and there'll be a bunch of other photographers there, and you naturally want to start talking to them because, hey, we're all photographers. And they're going to be some real jerk photographers. And I try to prepare my students for this, that there'll be a photographer you admire, and you go try and talk to them, and they're going to shut you down, and they're going to be mean, or they'll, I hate when people call other people photographers, like F-A-U-X, like is this like hip way to insult them, and like, that's just a time waster. Like, why can't we build each other up, right? Like, I know that it's a competitive world, but, so I tell my students, like, watch out for those people and write them off immediately. Don't let them put you down. All the things we've been talking about today, when we talk about, again, how there's no clear, license as to what it means to be a photojournalist, that means that photojournalists are the ones that are kind of drawing the boundaries of what it means. And all the things we've been talking about are used as boundary devices to shut people out. Because it can get competitive, and you want to justify your existence as a photojournalist and build credibility, and it's so easy to slip over sometimes into, well, they're just shooting with a kit lens, like they're an amateur. I know people with kit lenses and cheap cameras that can outshoot me any day because they have that eye, and because they understand how to use their equipment, and because they're telling a story, because we're focusing on the story first. And so, as much as we talk about all these things, and gear and access and training and all this kind of stuff, it's watch out for the people that are going to turn that into a gate to try and lock you out of being able to do it. And to go back to Dr. Briscoe's dissertation, one of the things that has been coming up a lot, it's nothing new to photojournalism, but especially in recent years we've started to try and address more, is just the lack of presence of women in photojournalism, and the way photojournalism has been seen as kind of a masculine side of journalism. And all of these boundaries and gates become even more enhanced when you put them in the hands of men who are using that as a way to also push women out of that, which, again, it was a powerful dissertation interviewing women in the field of photojournalism, both the trailblazers and the folks that are new into the industry, to talk about how that just is an added layer of trying to break into the field, especially as a freelancer. So yeah, photojournalists can be jerks. Don't worry about those, and equipment matters, but it's not the only thing.
I would say encourage them to nurture their curiosity and string together personal project after personal project. Find something that you're interested in and dive deep into it. And even if you don't have, someone that you're working for, we're at a day and age where you can set up your own website, or you could publish it to social media if you don't mind giving Mark Zuckerberg content to sell ads around. And that's another thing I'll speak on too. Realize that when you're publishing to places like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, you're giving your content over to these huge corporations so that they can sell ads around. So build yourself a website and give yourself a place to house your personal projects. And that can give yourself the validation you need to go after projects that you aren't assigned. And if you keep doing those and string them together, that gives you the opportunity to work on your craft and to become a better photographer. And you have to realize that because it's an enjoyable profession, an enjoyable work, there is that high competition, and it's like playing an instrument or a lot of other types of art. You get good at it by doing it over and over and over again. And so you have to practice it a lot, even if you're not working that day. But if you've got your own little spot that you can put your personal projects, or if you don't even necessarily want to share them, but I find that having my website where I can house those personal projects along the way has allowed me to practice without newspaper deadlines. And I could experiment a little bit more. And even though I still get work, I still go out and work on personal projects, and it makes me able to compete in the field.
One thing I'd like to add on to what you said there in encouraging youth today who might be interested in this profession is that I don't believe in my entire life I've ever met a rich photographer or a wealthy photographer who, got his wealth through the field of photojournalism or photography. So in order to give them a realistic idea, photojournalists aren't at the top rung when it comes down to the salaries or the amount that they. It's rewarding in many other ways, but a lot of times and with the avalanche of people now contributing images, in fact, probably our worth today is even less than it used to be. So when parents ask me to encourage their children, I tell them to be very realistic, that often it's not, they have to be very careful that they know what they're getting into, because the consistency of their income also might be another factor if you're working as a freelancer, or if you're working, say, on a speculative basis, or on a basis where you only will get paid when your work is accepted and printed. And then a lot of times, depending on your arrangement, it may be a time until you take, say, some pictures of an event, until you actually have the money in your bank account. It takes a while for that to happen. I too contribute to Getty, and sometimes, I may have a different kind of basis than you, but anyway, it's not every day that they send out a check. So sometimes you have to, and my historical photographs, rather than events today, would perhaps be the way that I today am still working as a photojournalist, even though I have started a museum. And the museum that I have started in Orangeburg really is built on the body of photographs that I photographed of, especially during the period here in South Carolina called the Civil Rights Movement era, which I roughly define as between 1950 and about 1970. And, but the youth today should be very realistic about what they define as being a means of making a living as they go into this, would be my final comment.
I love that y'all brought this up, because one thing that we've neglected to address, I think as much as we should, is the fact that there is a person behind the camera. The camera doesn't make the image, right? It's a human being bringing their lived experiences and their interests to the photograph. And so personal projects are a wonderful place to start, because it's stuff that you're interested in and stuff that you have experience about. And so your images will stand apart from others because this is something you care about, this is something you know about, this is a time period that's historical that you're living in, that you are a part of, and you're telling that story through your camera. And in the immediate context, that's important. In the historical context, it's extremely important to be able to tell those stories. And so don't feel like just because you're a photojournalist, you have to do these certain types of stories. Start with the things that you care about, and especially personal projects. If you're able to do that, it's such a great way to get those images and to tell those unique stories.
So Dr. Lough, you don't encourage your students to go find a different career choice?
we talk about money, yeah.
It's a hard career right now. That's why we're having this talk. Good. So I feel like we get it, as I've said. Like, photojournalists get it. They get why photojournalism is so incredibly important, and researchers like myself do. The hard part is to make audiences understand why there's photojournalism and then there's photography, and how when we go onto our whatever buffet of social media we have each day and scroll through, we're seeing so many different things, and not a lot of them these days are pictures taken by photojournalists that, again, abide by their code of ethics and are trained and are doing things right, doing things the way that journalism states that you should be done by. How do we make audiences care? How do we educate audiences about truthfulness in photography and photojournalism? But also, it's the people above the photojournalists, the news organizations, the people trying to bring in the money. They're the ones that are laying off the photojournalists. They're the ones who are saying, any picture will do as long as we have this text story. That's the most important thing. We just have to throw in a photo and we're good. How do we make everybody else care? Can I quote you on that?
It's tough during the period that I worked for Jet Magazine, and of course Jet now is a publication that is now defunct. It served its purpose during a period of time when especially news about the achievements and the events affecting people of color in the United States was subject to very specialized publications that had their readership in mind. But oftentimes, they're at the level where they are making the choice of what pictures to take me for, to assign me to take. Jet and Francis Mitchell, who was the associate editor that I worked with for Jet Magazine, he would often tell me that when I was assigned to a story, he had certain picture ideas that were a must that he wanted. He wanted, for example, coverage from a wide angle. He wanted coverage from a close-up. He wanted close-ups of the subject, or he wanted close-ups of the event, of wide variety, so that he would be able to then, with his writing and the story, be able to fill in with the captions, very powerful captions. Oftentimes doing the, and I started freelancing for Jet at 18 years old, which is quite, young to really be, you might say, a card-carrying photojournalist and making consistent money from that source. Oftentimes, in the very early days, Jet would, if there was an important story going on in South Carolina, and rarely because of my age did I get out of South Carolina, by the way, but often Jet would not trust me to do the writing. They would dispatch a writer along to the story, because in the very beginning, I don't think I was very good at writing the story and also taking the photographs. So often I would meet the writer at the airport, and then we would go together to capture the story. I remember one very important story we covered in Florence, South Carolina. It was of a red cap whose girlfriend had died of polio back during the time when polio was rampant, just as this COVID is today. In fact, it was ravaging the public, and everyone perhaps was vulnerable. And this red cap who worked for the railroad had a pickle jar, and he would go, often when he was in Florence, where his station was, the Silver Media train would come into Florence, and often on his days off, he would take that pickle jar and go around and collect funds. And so there's a story that I did for Jet called Red Cap Raises $250,000 to honor childhood sweetheart. And that's how they coined it. But they didn't trust me to write the story. They had a writer to come down. But certainly it's important to have really good, say, photojournalistic abilities from the camera side, but I'd also encourage, kind of piggybacking on our other topic, on our other question, our subject, persons also need to develop good writing skills to be able to describe what they have done, because you can't have but so many pictures. Pictures oftentimes, to make an impact in the publication, or for that matter, even on a screen, often have to be of a certain size. And of course, that takes up a lot of space and takes away from maybe something that's written. But the captions also have to be very powerful and to the point. And I remember getting the advice of that when I wrote my captions, the assignment editor would tell me, write to the photograph. This is what's happening to the photograph. You can't go too far and too broad out with what you are describing here, other than what you have, because that picture is supposed to really be, very condensed and right to the point of what are the stories about. Thank you for letting me make that comment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of, I think you can apply that to just journalism in general too. I mean, I think there are some distinctions about trust in photojournalism and trust in photojournalists, but I think we need to meet the audience halfway. I think journalists and photojournalists oftentimes throw the First Amendment around like, it's my right to be here and photograph this, and then the person who maybe is hurting and doesn't want to be photographed in like their time, like the worst time of their life, suddenly has lost this trust and faith in photojournalists. And yes, you had a right to be there and photograph it, but should you? And I think listening to the audience and asking, have you been hurt by this, or what do you think it means to be a journalist, and what should journalism do, and take that to heart in addition to our freedom and independence that the First Amendment allows us for the right of a free press. But I just think sometimes we do get too wrapped up in journalism and we forget that there are human beings out there. And I don't know if that's going to work or not. I encourage my students to try and listen. I think a lot of conflict could be settled with conversation. I know there's a lot of conflict that can't, but it's kind of the shrug. Like I don't know. I just hope that it gets better.
Great, thank you for the thoughtful answers as well as the two shrugs. Those are good. But I think that's reflective of the state of where we're at, is kind of, where are we headed? So I'll follow up with probably a final broad question, which is, what does the future of photojournalism look like? What should it look like, and what can we do to make it continue to thrive as an important component of informing the public and upholding democracy? Big one for you.
Encourage your friends to support newspapers in general. I guess that's...
I think the future of photojournalism is bright and exciting because, again, just think of all the new gear that will come about and all of the new opportunities and the expanding universe of, like today we have the internet. Who's to say in the future there might be something else out there as impactful and dramatic, some technological development that would, say, be another type of, maybe another internet invention or another computer graphic breakthrough. What has interested me a lot, and especially because I like to look at science fiction movies and everything, science fiction, is artificial intelligence. Will there one day be a type of artificial intelligence that rather than a human being writing a story, they could push a few buttons and make that story come together? It's almost that way now. I mean, we're not too far away from that really now, but artificial intelligence, I think, just think of the excitement that that will bring along. And so I think that, wow, to be a young person growing up today and knowing where we've come from and all of the things that will become available to them in the future, it can no doubt enhance humanity and no doubt help us in a democracy like we live in the United States become better citizens so that we can reach out and help people and reach out and be helpful citizens ourselves. We can also be more enlightened citizens so that we would know how to treat everyone and know how to be healthier and know how to just be knowledgeable about many subjects, even though you might specialize in something, but you'll be more multifaceted in whatever your knowledge. So that's how I see the future happening in photojournalism and life itself.
I appreciate that positive outlook. That's wonderful.
So I like to see the world through rose-colored glasses. I'm an optimist, but I'm also a realist. So it's like rose-colored glasses, but also like looking over the top with like a furrowed brow. And I want to go back to something Cecil said early on in our conversation, and that's access. My concern with the future of photojournalism is access, because there are plenty of venues that are not fully public and require credentialed access or permission to come into that space to make photographs. And a lot of my research background is in music photography and concert photography, which is one of those credentialed spaces. If you want to photograph a concert, you have to apply and be presented a credential that allows you in to make those photos. And pre-COVID times, when we had concerts all the time, one of the things that was starting to happen was a lot of some musicians and their management were saying, well, we're not going to allow photographers. You can bring a reviewer, but we'll have a photographer there and we'll give you photos. Like, we'll have handout photos after the show. And a lot of newspapers and media outlets balked against this, and they said no, because those are your pictures, so you're only going to show like the best stuff, which, yeah, you want to put your best photos anyway, and it seems kind of like silly to be talking about this in the context of concert photography. But to me, it's troubling, because then that starts extending out. You know, what if there's a major event that happens at this concert and you don't have a photographer there? Let's start branching this out. Well, you know, a friend is working on a political campaign and they have a friend who manages bands, and they're like, oh, we can do that. And you've seen this already a little bit in the press being limited at political events. And so now they're saying, well, we'll give you photos, because it's just a picture of the politician speaking, right? Like, there's no need to have an independent free press there making those pictures. Like, yeah, they can come write about it, but we'll send you pictures. And by cutting off this access bit by bit, we're now putting that editorial control in the hands of the PR and the management side, who are always going to be trying to put their best foot forward. And it's like we talked about with the ethical considerations before. Who's behind this photo? How edited was it? Did they touch up, you know, the wrinkles on that person's face, and now, you know, we have an unethical photo? And I worry that, especially in the pandemic too, where we've had limited photographer access, that when we reopen back up, whenever that is, fully, to whatever the world is going to look like, that some of these limitations on access will start to kind of continue. I mean, you see it in sports too. You don't even have reporters a lot of times in the post-game press conference. They're zooming in, and just not physically being there, I think, makes a huge difference. And so I'm concerned about the level of access to journalists and photojournalists in the future, and I hope that people will continue to give them the access that they need to be able to tell their stories. And in turn, I hope that the photojournalists tell those ethically. Can I turn the question back around on you? Because you've done research in this space too, and I think from what you've researched, that you could shed some light on this as well.
What question did I ask?
The future.
The future of photojournalism. I think that visual news literacy is incredibly important. I don't know that the general public understands necessarily. I hate to talk down on the general public. That's not what I'm trying to do, but there's just so much going on out there that how could you understand where your photos are coming from, or that the image that is accompanying the front page story of what you're reading is a stock photo. It's fake, it's staged, right? There's nothing real or photojournalistic about it. Or, you're scrolling through and looking at extremely biased pictures a lot of times. I think that memes, photographs accompanied by text are incredibly damaging. I just think there's so much false and misleading visual information out there that I think one of the best steps we could take to ensure the continued thriving profession of photojournalism would be to educate everybody about visual news literacy and get people better equipped to look at their photos and assess them for journalistic quality. Unfortunately, we have to do that now. It used to be that we could open up a news page and generally trust what we were seeing. Unfortunately, that's not the case anymore. So I see visual news literacy as a huge part of maintaining the integrity of photojournalism in the future. Any other last comments before we open it up to questions?
I'll say, I guess most of the people here are interested in journalism and newspapers. Communicate, like I said, with your friends, and encourage them to support newspapers, not as like a typical transaction that we normally think of, like how we spend our money and support things, but rather as an investment into the communities in which those papers cover. And if you can convince your friends that what they're doing isn't just like buying a candy bar that gives them something at that moment, or typically the way that we spend money, and that they're investing in the future of whatever community that media organization or newspaper covers, I think it can click more about why they should support journalism in general.
I have one comment in these closing moments I'd like to make. I said earlier that, again, photojournalists should not try to manipulate or change or alter maybe the images that they're using to tell a story in a publication. But I have one exception to that I think I'd like to share with you. I remember once here we are in Charleston, South Carolina, a very historic city, one of America's most beautiful cities, a very historical city. We had many people who, during the era of the civil rights movement of America, who rose in popularity, in notoriety, in just doing things. And one of those persons was Septima Clark. I photographed Septima Clark about 3 or 4 years before she passed. And I remember as I photographed her at her house on President Street, right here in Charleston, even though at that time I submitted pictures to the Afro-American, the Pittsburgh Courier, and Jet Magazine. But at the time, I also had at one time, a weekly newspaper myself. So when I was in charge of my newspaper and the publications I have done, that picture I took of Septima Clark that I took before her death, at that time she had only the use of one eye. And since she did so many things in her life for humanity and for not only the people of Charleston, but the people of South Carolina, the people, Martin Luther King's, in fact, a mentor, and the person who really was referred to as the mother of the civil rights movement. I didn't want her to, be depicted in publications and books with one eye that was partially closed. So in Photoshop, I was able to correct that picture. And I don't feel bad about it, nor do I feel that, because I first of all used it in my own publications, wherein she has both eyes open, because I knew that 1 minute or that 1 second that I photographed her in Charleston here, probably in, I believe, the 80s, wasn't reflective of her entire life and the contribution she had made. So I slightly changed the image I had of her. So that's a confession.
All right, we'll end on that controversial note. That's great. I do want to take some audience questions, but before we do that, let's please give a big applause to our wonderful panel here. I'm not sure the best way to do this. I'm not used to being on a stage, and it's strange. I can't really see. Oh, better. I can see you guys. Yeah, are there any questions that I can have the panel answer for you?
Thank you all. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you all so much. This was really, really interesting and such an important topic. You know, at the end, asking like what can be done in the future. You know, some of it is just educating ourselves, making sure that we're all aware of the importance of photojournalism kind of on a personal level. But I'm wondering too about collective, photojournalism, community action, and if there is much movement in that area around through unionization of photojournalists, and then also like the National Press Photographers Association. Are they successfully pressing newspapers to uphold these ethical standards, and so that if they are just taking newspapers from, or photographs from amateurs, I mean, are there any larger organizations that are speaking to the kind of issues that you are all addressing and pressing the powers that be to uphold these ethics and uphold this important field that is vital to our democracy?
Absolutely. Like you said, the National Press Photographers Association, which is headquartered at the University of Georgia, they advocate heavily, especially legally, for photojournalists when necessary. So for example, they were one of the early proponents to get cameras in courtrooms way back in the day. Currently, I think one of the most recent examples, they've fought against some of the freelance copyright. I can't remember what that was specifically, but there was also a case where a police department was trying to subpoena photojournalist images from photographing a protest so they could start identifying people, and you can't do that. And the NPPA helped advocate on behalf of the photojournalists to help say, like, no. And so they're also constantly taking input. They're trying to keep a finger on the pulse of what's important. There was also last summer the Photo Bill of Rights, which was a document that was created through a collective of several different photographic organizations. I think Native Photograph, Women Photograph. There were several groups that came together. And this was broader than just photojournalism. It was photography as a whole, to try and address some of the inequities that was happening on both sides of the lens, in terms of representation, in terms of what we were talking about before, people being photographed in the worst moments of their life. And it's been met with some controversy, especially in the photojournalistic community, when it comes to, do you ask somebody for consent before you make their photo, which you don't have to in many cases, but should you? But it's also, again, trying to address some of these ethical concerns that have been coming up, especially in the era of digitization, where you're photographed and that can be instantly seen all over the world, versus the slower kind of transmission in years past. So those are some organizations doing the work. I'm sure there are others out there as well.
I believe some groups of photographers, like maybe the paparazzi, they kind of give photographers a bad rep, but I think, still yet they specialize for certain type of publications which might require that. But I was about to add also that copyright infringement is a big problem. I find today that the general public does not respect copywriting of images, not only that appear on the internet and on your desktop, but also pictures that are in publications as well. But thankfully, the United States Supreme Court has spoken up for photographers, but still yet it's not broadly known of this right to, that you can be subject to violation if you don't obey those copyrights, but it is a big issue. It was a big issue even with, I think under what is called the work for hire under Life magazine photographers. For example, after many Life magazine photographers, when that magazine at its heyday, it was the magazine in the world, and then it went down, and as a great journalistic publication, and many of the photographers who worked for them felt they had some rights to their images, and the Supreme Court ruled that they did. They were, in other words, when you're making a photograph, whether you are doing it with your cell phone or whether you're doing it with a very high price camera like my friends here and I use, you are the creator of that photograph, and you are entitled to certain rights and benefits.
Were you asking if there were groups that were communicating with media publications?
A way that you all are able to collectively advocate for, so you're not all freelancers in 10 years, you know?
I mean, I think it's tough because, like, for example, at the main local newspaper in Columbia, there hasn't been a photo editor there in, I don't know how many years. There's only 2 staff photographers. They're just so, the visually thinking people are so outnumbered by everyone else in the organization, and everyone in the organization is basically just trying to hang on by a thread. So there's oftentimes not really a place and time in which that can be facilitated. And I don't think there's, you know, a group that's communicating with, you know, newspapers about the importance of, you know, like, what happens when you get rid of your photo editor? What happens when there's no longer communication lines between, like without a photo editor, there's not communication line between me as a freelancer and that paper. There's no one for me to really talk to who can understand, you know, what I think is important and can communicate those things and stand up in that newsroom for what's important. Here in Charleston, you guys have a great newspaper and aren't in that situation. But in Columbia, that's definitely the case.
I was in photography for a while. I know that it takes a lot of time and just a lot of commitment to get the photos you want. So how long does it take you personally to get those photos that you want and get that perfect frame, that perfect picture?
All day. My whole life. It never ends, I guess. And I don't think there's ever, I don't ever find myself there. When I was younger, I would think like, oh yeah, I got the perfect photo. But that really, it doesn't exist. And the more you educate yourself about what makes a good photo, the more things that you can pick out and the mistakes, and you can say, oh, if I could have only been, in this spot over here, or if the light could have been going this way. And that's kind of the beauty of it too, is that it's kind of a never-ending pursuit of it, in which oftentimes you're always kind of falling short, and you have to kind of be okay with that, that things aren't going to be perfect, and I think that's part of the beauty of it too. It's like jazz, I guess, that it's real malleable.
I was having trouble with my slideshow earlier, but as long as the question came up and I had a chance to play with this, these are a few of Sean's photos.
Another question that I do have is, how do you feel personally about how I kind of see it is, like, our phones are taking away your job, and like your job is very, very important, and you can do a lot more with your equipment, but how does it feel personally to you that the internet is kind of like taking bits and pieces of your job slowly away?
I think it's challenging because it keeps us, whether I'm doing photojournalistic work or whether I'm just doing photography work, keeps me on my toes. And actually, sometimes I have been at an event where I see a person taking a picture with their cell phone, and they've really got a better angle, and there's something happening over in that part of the room or where they are that's better than where I am taking the pictures of what I'm doing. So I think that all the better. That we should. It helps us to really tweak our own craft so we can become better storytellers. And I think I'm welcome. As I said earlier during our conversation here, it's interesting though that I have not seen a Bigfoot sighting photograph or flying saucers being captured in great clarity. They're always fuzzy and out of focus. Do I believe in there's life on other places? Yeah, surely, but I'm not sure that a lot of the images that we have captured have been really authentic. But I believe that as my fellow panelists here brought out earlier, you are a journalist in that moment while you're capturing that with your cell phone. And again, as the cell phones improve in resolution and clarity, and all kinds of things they can do, such as being able to move in closer, where we have to have a dedicated lens to do that. You're going to be able to capture images that, when I'm not being a journalist, I'm looking at maybe a publication that your image may appear in, so all the better. Yes.
And these are just a few of Cecil Williams' images that I'll play real quick.
I find that social media is a bigger threat than the technology itself. And when Facebook first came around, and everyone, how are they going to make money? I mean, we see it today, like, and I said it before, they're selling ads around the content that we upload, and people don't have to leave those social media sites to go to the places that support the content creators. And I think that part of it's really devastating. And the algorithms encourage everyone to upload their content to these social media sites instead of actually visiting the content creators. And if people don't ever have to leave Facebook to get their content, because the algorithms keep pushing, for example, if I publish something on my own website and upload a link to Facebook on it, it'll get a little bit of interaction. But if I upload a photo itself, all the time, the amount of interaction that it gets on those social media sites is multiple times more. And I see what they're doing. They want you to give them content so that they can have it on their platform and they can sell ads around it. And we've seen what social media has done to newspapers, and people don't recognize this as much either, and I didn't until somewhat recently, but Craigslist. Newspapers used to be able to sell classified advertising space. That's gone, and so you've got all these platforms that have siphoned away from newspapers' ability to bring in income, and newspapers are typically the only ones that support photojournalists. Facebook definitely doesn't.
I have a quick question. How have you managed to avoid personal opinion while photographing such controversial events over your career, and has it ever made you question your career?
I once lived with I'd say like a political reporter, and he was a really good example of how to uninvolve yourself and understand the importance of projecting objectivity was much greater than any opinion that you had. And if you can step back and recognize that, and it's taken me a long time to really put my arms around that, because I used to be pretty opinionated, but I found that it was more important for me to not be. And especially this day and age, it's really easy to put that opinion out, and I've just come to personally value the attempts at objectivity more, because I guess my path depends upon it.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, remembering what you're doing that for, what the purpose of this is, to spread seek truth and report it, and have that audience, have that audience's trust where they know that I mean, we all have inherent biases, that's just fact. We all have blind spots, we all have fault lines. I go over this frequently with my students, that it affects how we see the world, and as long as we recognize that and do our best to make sure that that's not getting in the way of the reporting, so that we can seek that truth and report it to the greater population that's reading this, I think. And the thing that I think we get kind of lost in sometimes is only thinking about this on like the big scale of like the huge important things, and forgetting that a lot of us are going to work in a small community. I worked at a small newspaper, circulation 8,000, and the Chamber of Commerce director would make fun of me because like he always wanted to take us out to lunch just to like thank us for our reporting that we were doing in the community, and I was like, I can't do that, and I could. It's a meal, it's no big deal, but you have a county executive in the same restaurant, and he sees us all sitting around, and the next time we do a piece on what the city is doing in their business district, he's like, well, that's just because he's in their pocket. That little kind of stuff that just doesn't seem like it's a big deal, but you're also acknowledging that you are trying to be a citizen of that community too. You're going to church with the same people that you're reporting on, or you're existing in that same space as them, which is where I think the real challenge comes, to be able to exist in that space as a human being, because we're all humans first, period. We're humans first, but also being able to do your job there.
And I think if you teach yourself that it's really not about you, and that's a tough thing to do, because when we come into this world, we see ourselves as everyone else. When you're little, everyone else exists for the purpose of you. And there's some point, you grow up and then you realize, oh, wait a second, these are actually other human beings around me, and they're not all just here for me. And as a journalist, I think that you just have to nail that thought into your head again and again and again, that it's not about you. And when you can present things objectively, you'll find that people will reach out and give you that access that is so important. So I can, for example, I can cover something where I obviously think that, what's going on, like these people were complete fools and morons or idiots or whatever, but if I can present their story as just human beings, so that other people in the community can understand where they're coming from, without my thoughts and without injecting, certain words into that type of coverage that I do, you can gain their respect, and they'll invite you to future things, and you can get that ever precious access. And I find that, especially this day and age, that people are really appreciative of that, whether they also think those people are fools, or if they're, the folks that you can't identify with at all, and you'll find that you learn yourself because you're getting that type of access, and you're learning about the other people around you, even though that doesn't fit, with your mindset, and just kind of just push that to the side of, it's tough, but the rewards to it, I think, are so great, that once you start getting a taste of it, that it becomes a lot easier.
I think
I graduated from College of Charleston in 2001, and there weren't jobs 20 years ago. So you might have to make your own job. I was wondering, are there any professional press organizations or even schools that offer direct communication with the public to educate them about what is real and fake in real time? Because I know you've spoken several times about stock footage or your 2015 image that was used recently. And I just feel like I hate it when people are saying they can't trust the press. But yet, I don't feel like the press has a figurehead or anyone that is speaking on their behalf as a professional organization or even as the fourth estate. You know, that's how important the press is. And I think a lot of people here care so much about the press, and we are so freaking worried about the future. I mean, like I said, 20 years ago, I was competing in Charleston for the Post and Courier with people from Princeton and Yale. That's how many communications people, you know, really few jobs, but so many communications graduates. And so I just feel like there needs to be more of a presence, a professional presence in journalism. And UGA, I had early acceptance, you know, out-of-state tuition was insane. But you are such a force in the world, University of Georgia at Athens. I mean, we are begging you to come out, you know. I know that journalism has a lot of sort of antisocial or not out in, you know, it's not your job, like you just said, to be out in public and make the story about you, but somebody needs to be standing up for the press. I mean, we're dying here.
Real quick, I'm going to let that be the last question of the evening. We're way over time, which is awesome. I'm so glad we have so many questions. And if you were just like sitting there jonesing to ask something, we'll hang out a few minutes. But thank you so much.
There's some really good research trying to interrogate that, especially in the nature of corrections and comment sections and open forums with community members to try and bring them in to understand how things are going. But, you know, it also, I had a quote taped to my monitor in the newsroom, "Never explain, your friends don't need it and your enemies won't believe you anyway," which I used whenever people would call to yell at me about things, like when they'd measure column inches for one high school's coverage versus the other. So I don't think that universally applies, but no, I agree. I think media literacy and visual media literacy is very important, and I'm often blind to that because I'm on the inside of journalism, so to me it's inherent, and I don't know what the public is getting. But I'm following this research on what happens when we allow the public to edit stories, or we have a editor's note at the end explaining why we made this decision. Does that make a difference or not? Which I hope will start to answer those questions.
As long as you have great newspapers, like, for example, Post and Courier, like living in Orangeburg, we have a small town newspaper, and it can only do so much. It can't do any investigative reporting and that kind of thing, but newspapers and magazines and publications are so important to democracy. This country would not be what it is, and it would not sustain itself if it were not for the great journalism and the freedom of the press. This is one of the cornerstones of our democracy, in fact. So I believe that even though there would be political times when someone would take undercut shots at the press and try to paint an ugly picture of the press, I think that it will come out on the other end and later on for what it's worth, and you can't stamp out the truth. In countries where they do not have a free press, the people suffer, and the people can't really know what's going on, and they can't be trusted. Sure, there are problems with all parts of our society, and we have bad politicians and that thing, and all kinds of things like that, and bad people and good people. But still yet, the press, I think, will survive, and we need people like yourself, the graduates of our universities, to go out there and continue spreading the word and being the best you can to live up to your ideals, and the ideals that made this a great country.
I think that maybe the solution to the problem that we're looking at is maybe in schools themselves, and I'm not involved in. I mean, I talk to university groups and occasionally a high school group, but it's typically people that are already interested in the field. But maybe we need to look at elementary and middle school and high school classes. And whether there is, I don't know, is there media literacy classes in high school right now? I mean, what more important could there be of like the consuming of information than something like that? And maybe that's something that we need to talk to our school boards about, or our friends that are teachers, and ask them those questions. But yeah, I guess that's my thought on that.
All right, well, I realize a number of people had to go because we had so many good questions and we're a little over, but and I think we have some people online too, but let's give, please, one last round of applause. It's gonna be a little quiet to our great panelists. And again, if you do have a pressing question, we'll hang out for a little bit. So thank you so much for coming, everybody. Really appreciate it.